My name is Annie Zaleski, and I am a Lakewood resident and Rocky River native, and I am the author of a new book on Duran Duran. It's a book on Rio, the band's 1982 album, and it's part of a book series called the 33 1/3 series, which are tiny volumes about one record album. My background is that I've always wanted to be a writer, even when I was a kid. In second grade, I was the one who was writing 4-paragraph essays when you only needed one. My background is in journalism. I started doing journalism in junior high and high school. And when I went to college, I wrote for my college newspaper and then later interned at the Cleveland-based music magazine, Alternative Press. From there, I spent many, many years doing music journalism, writing for places such as Billboard, Rolling Stone, The Guardian, NPR Music, Spin, you name it, I've probably pretty much written for them. So I'm going to back up there. I've written for a lot of places. I've written for Salon, I've written for the AV Club, Rolling Stone, NPR Music, The Guardian. But I've always had a deep love for music, basically. Duran Duran has been one of my favorite bands since I was in high school. One of my very first concerts was actually seeing them at the Lakewood Civic Auditorium in 1997. But I loved them even before that. So writing this book was pretty much a dream come true for me. I had been wanting to write a book on Duran Duran since, 2007. They had a rolling call for proposals, this series. And I started pitching them in the mid-2000s because I believe this record had a really, really wonderful story. So I started pitching them, and I was not successful twice. But in late 2018, they had another call for proposals, and I decided, hey, you know what? I need to try again because I knew that I was the right person to write this book, and I knew that I could do a really good job with it. So a couple days before the deadline, I took my older proposal, buried it in an email inbox. I took a look at it, ripped it up, updated it, and submitted it. And in early 2019, I got an email that I had been chosen to write this book. Now, Duran Duran is a very interesting band. I think most people know them, that they started off in the early 80s. They had a massive hit in America with Hungry Like the Wolf and Rio, both on this book, Rio, or the album Rio. So Duran Duran has a really interesting backstory. They started off in Birmingham, England in the late 1970s. It was started by Nick Rhodes and John Taylor, who were two childhood friends who loved Roxy music and David Bowie, and they would go record shopping together. When they finally became, graduated high school, got a little bit older, they decided to start a band. And they found a drummer in Roger Taylor, who was also from Birmingham, England. And then they had a bunch of lineup changes, and then they ended up finally recruiting guitarist Andy Taylor and vocalist Simon Le Bon. And in 1980, they played their first show. And from there, their career was a complete wild ride. They released their debut album in 1981 that had a few hits in American dance clubs, Girls on Film and Planet Earth. So they toured America and kind of laid the groundwork for what would come. So 1982's Rio, the subject of my book, was an immediate hit in England. It was a top 10 record, and they had all these hit singles. And so Duran Duran were really superstars there. In America, things took much, much longer to take off. Rio came out, and they had support from radio stations here and there around the country, including WMMS here in Cleveland. But they were still kind of a cult band. They were getting college radio play. They opened for Blondie in 1982. They were playing clubs. They played the Agora in August of 1982. But they didn't have widespread attention. And back in the day, what basically made you a hit band was having a hit single on the radio. So Duran Duran worked very, very hard. They remixed songs, and they finally got a hit. But that wasn't until 1983. In the meantime, what really made Duran Duran popular was MTV. Now, MTV had started in August 1981, and it was kind of an underground phenomenon at first. It was only in several million households because cable TV was such a new phenomenon then, and MTV was in suburbs. They weren't even in major cities yet. But because Duran Duran had music videos to share with them, they were able to get a little bit of airplay. And to support the songs on Rio, they ended up filming these glamorous videos in other locales. For example, they went to Antigua and they filmed a video. They were on vacation and their manager said, hey, we're going to film a video. So there's an iconic photo of them on a yacht sailing, and that for the Rio video, which was the title track of the record, and that was one of their videos. They also went to Sri Lanka and filmed multiple videos there, these very cinematic, movie-like videos. Hungry Like the Wolf resembled Indiana Jones a little bit in the way that it was very action-packed. And vocalist Simon Le Bon, who had actually an acting background, was kind of a natural for the camera. So they filmed these videos, and MTV loved them. MTV put them in rotation, in heavy rotation, and they became MTV phenomenon before anywhere else. And in fact, MTV support really helped the band become popular. It helped them sell records. So the book looks at all of this stuff. The book kind of looks at how the record came together. The band recorded the album at Air Studios, which was owned by the Beatles producer George Martin. And they had written some songs they had kind of had laying around. Some other songs were new. And they worked for a couple months in early 1982 and put the record together. Then they really hit the road and started touring like any young band. And then we had MTV, and then finally they were able to take off. But this book looks at the recording process, how the songs came together. They look at how they lay the groundwork for Rio, looking at their touring in 1981, all the music and their hard work and their practicing even. The book then kind of takes a look at, a little bit of analysis of the record. Why is it so good? Why are we still talking about it? They talk about, and I talk extensively as well about MTV and the music videos and why Duran Duran were so unique in the kind of the music video world, and why their videos were so unique and had such a deep impact. And then I talk about their success. In 1983, Duran Duran had one of the biggest years that really of any rock band you can think of. They had in America, Rio was a hit, and in 1983, Rio was a hit, and that made their debut album become a hit. In America, their 1981 debut record wasn't that popular at first. It was kind of, an underground hit. And that spawned hits for their debut record. They had a new single appended to the record, and it was reissued, and it became a massive hit. By the end of 1983, they put out a new studio record. So at one point, Duran Duran had 3 studio records on the Billboard charts, and in addition to having multiple hit singles. So the book is really kind of, it's a narrative of sort of hard work. It's a narrative of how something becomes a success against all odds. It's a narrative of overcoming obstacles. It's a narrative of how do you enjoy the success and why does this band still matter? In addition to that, I talked to some fans. Duran Duran has a very, very loyal fan base, very dedicated, even to this day. And one of the things about Duran Duran is that back in the day when they became so popular, they were seen as a boy band. They were seen as a pop band. And that was really kind of a derogatory sort of statement. People thought that they couldn't play their instruments. People thought that someone else wrote their music. They were seen as kind of just pretty boys, not like anything that was actually, not like a real band who would, be in a practice space practicing. So I talked to some fans kind of about that, because it's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is I always thought it was patently unfair that the band was really misunderstood so much, that the band just really was deemed to be this kind of prefab product when in fact they were these really talented musicians who worked very hard to be good at what they did. So I talked to some fans about that because, a lot of Duran Duran's fans were teenage girls, and the likes of teenage girls are always really kind of denigrated, as if, teenagers and their tastes really don't matter. And so I touched a little bit on that too. And so, part of the reason why I wanted to write this book was sort of vindication, to kind of say, hey, this is a great band that deserves a lot of respect. And in recent years, Duran Duran has gotten a lot more respect, I think, from people. You look, their bassist, John Taylor, did these bass tutorials that basically showing how he played these songs. And besides being really mind-blowing because he was able to sort of break everything down in really unique ways, there are all these comments, people saying, hey, this is really cool. This guy's such a great bass player. He's awesome. And so there have been things like that. And so I'm hoping this book as well also kind of adds to the chorus that, hey, this is a really wonderful record. This is a really meaningful record. And this is why people should really, give it respect. Like maybe if you didn't like it back in 1982, give it a chance. You might be surprised at what you hear. So that's a little bit about that then, so I'm not sure what else I can talk about, if there's anything else you want me to talk about. I should mention too that this Rio's cover is a painting by Patrick Nagel, who was a very famous artist, popular in the early 80s. And so that's another part of why the album's appeal, is that they really sort of made the album high art, basically. And they worked with a graphic designer named Malcolm Garrett, who also kind of put his spin on that and added some graphic design touches. And so this is one of the most iconic album covers of the 80s by far. Thank you for having me. I spent over a year, probably a year and a half working on this book, and so I'm very gratified that it's finally out there in the world and people can read it. You can get it at the library, and it's a good beach read, I've been told. You can read it in a couple days. So if you're going on summer vacation, borrow the book, and I promise it'll be a breezy, fun read.